Please begin recording, Susan.
Good evening. My name is Sally Allen, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to our online forum featuring candidates for Ann Arbor City Council Ward 5. The candidates will be on the ballot in the primary election on Tuesday, August 4th. This year, the League of Women Voters is celebrating 100 years of expanding voter rights, educating voters, and influencing legislation at local, state, and national levels. We are pleased to sponsor these forums. The League is a nonpartisan civic organization that encourages informed and active participation by all citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and seeks to strengthen and broaden knowledge about our form of government and democracy. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take stands on issues we have studied. One of the League's most important goals is to assist voters in making informed choices at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's program. Our moderator this evening is Peter Allen, who will explain the format and get us started.
Thank you, Sally. It's my honor to introduce the three candidates running for Ann Arbor City Council for Ward 5, Erica Briggs, Dan Miknovich, and David Silkworth. Thank you, candidates, for participating this evening. The forum today will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement for up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement for up to 90 seconds. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and in between, I will ask questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. At appropriate times, a sign on the screen will indicate the time remaining. 30 seconds, and then stop. If you have used up your time, you will be allowed to finish your sentence. And then your microphone will be muted so that the other candidates have an equal opportunity to participate. The candidates will begin speaking in alphabetical order. Depending on the number of questions, all candidates will have an opportunity to be the first or last to answer each of the questions. We're now ready for your opening statement, Ms. Briggs.
Great. Thank you so much to the League for hosting this forum this evening. Again, my name is Erica Briggs, and I'm running for City Council in Ann Arbor's 5th Ward. I've lived in Ann Arbor for the last 20 years and raised my 2 boys here. I'm currently the director of an environmental nonprofit, and I just finished my PhD in political science. I'm deeply committed to building sustainable, livable, and just communities, and I've spent the last 15 years working to advance these goals here in Ann Arbor and across the state. I don't just love this city, I feel a responsibility to it. And increasingly, I'm worried about what I'm seeing. I'm watching our neighbors get pushed out of our community because they can't afford to live here anymore. Sidewalks near schools get voted down, and affordable housing advocates berated by City Council. We deserve elected officials who understand the power of their words, have respect for the institutions that they govern, seek to unify, not divide us, and understand that Ann Arbor's future may look different from our past. But if we carefully manage our growth and treat each other with care, we can actually build a better Ann Arbor together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs. And Mr. Miknovich, when we have your opening statement, please. Sorry about that.
Thank you. My name is Dan Miknovich. I too am running for Ann Arbor City Council in the 5th Ward here. Thanks to everybody who's involved in putting this on. This is really useful for the voters. I'm running for City Council because local politicians like to talk about people like me and the people I work with. I work in the food service industry here in town. And you'll often hear them say things like, well, there's 80,000 people who commute to Ann Arbor a day. Don't you think some of them might want to live here? And my response to that is, I work with these people, I organize with these people politically, and we can do a better job of advocating for ourselves than our current political leadership has. Our current political leadership also they've done a decent job of identifying issues that we need to work on. Housing, after the death of Orr Rosser at the hands of the police department, declared a policing emergency. The mayor said, we're gonna do everything we can to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And more recently, we've committed to becoming carbon neutral as a city. We haven't made up the kind of ground on our housing goals that we should, and I'd like to see us work on that.
Thank you. Mr. Silkworth.
Good evening. I'm David Silkworth, and I want to thank the League for hosting this event and Erica and Dan for participating in it. I hope you and your families are all safe and well, and I thank you all for your service. I'm running for the 5th Ward City Council seat because I believe government must listen to the concerns of all of its residents. I've lived in Ann Arbor for the last 27 years. I graduated from U of M with a BA in sociology. I chose to make this my home because I love the unique charm and character of this city and its people. I've always felt welcome here, and I share this community's values. My greatest strength is that I've spent the last 5 years being a local activist working on local issues. I've spoken with residents and listened to their concerns, and I've worked with community members, stakeholders, city staff, and elected officials on a wide range of issues. Please visit my website, votedavidsilkworth.org, for more information, and I look forward to serving you on council.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. And now to the questions. As a reminder, I will be reading the question once. It will not be repeated unless specifically requested. To begin tonight, we start with Mr. Miknovich for the first question, which is, the questions we receive from community members fall into several categories. Some have been around for a long time: housing, affordability, gentrification, environment, and some, based on recent events, have definitely now come to the forefront, such as safety and police reform, racial justice, diversity, inclusion, and now the city budget challenges due to the COVID pandemic. So here's the first question. In which of these areas do you think you are most passionate and capable of making a difference?
In which of these areas do I think I'm most passionate and capable of making a difference? Well, there is a couple factors there. It's what is local government capable of doing? And I think the answer for me here is I want to make good on our commitments to the climate and our commitment to carbon neutrality as a community. And part of that is just pointing out what we're doing as a city that's good in the A20 plan and what we could do that I think differently. And the main issue I have with our plan to pursue carbon neutrality as a city right now is that it relies heavily on community choice aggregation, which currently isn't actionable in the state of Michigan. We would need change of state law there. And as an alternative, I think we should be pursuing a locally controlled public energy utility as a way to tell DTE to go away. They're an investor-owned utility and they don't share our values as a community, and they're not going to move fast enough to renewable energy. So I think just partially in terms of campaigning and not even being on council right now, that's part of the discussion. And I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Mr. Silkworth.
We have so many really important things happening here right now that I'm not sure I can identify any single biggest issue. As a council member, you really have to be able to understand all of the local issues and respond appropriately. The A20 plan called for the elimination of protections for single-family neighborhoods throughout our city. That caused a lot of concern for people who knew about it. Unfortunately, most residents were never adequately informed, which is something that I find troubling. The language was dropped from the plan that ultimately passed, but there are still people pushing hard for it and people who've promised to bring disruption to our neighborhoods. I will oppose efforts that might bring disruption to our single-family neighborhoods. Many of the businesses that make our community a great place to live and work are struggling to find a way to reopen successfully. Some are struggling to determine whether they'll be able to reopen at all. Like many of you, I'm saddened by the recent announcements of local business closings. You know, the city has done some things to assist, and they should continue to work with business owners to help ensure their continued success. There are a lot of folks who lost jobs permanently or who've returned to work at reduced hours or incomes, so they'll struggle paying rent, city taxes and fees, and the city needs to do a good job to make sure that we keep people in their homes with good services until they can recover. There are so many other issues, including maintaining affordability for current residents, police reforms, social justice, police oversight, affordable housing, the Gelman plume, PFAS, and other environmental cleanups, climate change, historic preservation, protection of our natural features. You know, I could go on and on about issues. You know, I wish we had more time to discuss all of these with you in greater detail, my approach to any proposed policy has always been, how does it affect our residents and how do they feel about it? I'll be an independent voice and a problem solver on council, and I'll work collaboratively to address all of these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Ms. Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. There are a lot of old and new issues that we need to be focused on. And for me, I've had three sort of priority areas that I've been thinking about: environmental stewardship, growing our community responsibly, and good governance. In terms of which one I think I'm most passionate about and most capable of making a difference, I think it's on the good governance piece. Obviously, I have strong academic training, a PhD in political science, master's in public administration, but I also have a strong history in community service in this community. So currently serving on Planning Commission has given me a really strong understanding of our code and our policies. And I've also worked as an activist in our community for the last 15 years as well, trying to improve our streets and make them safer for bikers and pedestrians. And, when we're focusing in on good governance, this is essential, because if we start looking at kind of what the stats are in terms of people's confidence in government, at the federal level, the stats say that about 17% have faith in the federal government. But at the local level, it's actually alarmingly low as well. 65% of Ward 5 residents have confidence in our local government, and that's pretty concerning. And so how we're going to address that is recognizing that there are some real differences in how we're looking at these issues, whether it's land use or environmental stewardship, police, public safety, all these issues. And we need to be able to work collaboratively with one another, not demonize each other, and really focus in on public engagement and citizen participation. So, I've consistently worked as a planning commissioner to make that process more transparent and open up our meetings so that we have better communications. And it would continue to do so on City Council. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs. On to question number 2, starting with Mr. Silkworth. Daily headlines are getting worse regarding COVID-19. Ann Arbor will be experiencing a significant drop in city revenue. What areas within the budget do you think could offer significant savings, but that do not seriously compromise important programs and services?
Thank you. The recession brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic will seriously impact our city budget for the next few years, and there aren't any easy solutions. The state has a budget shortfall, so there won't be much help there. The federal government may help out, but I doubt they'll step up to do what's needed to return people, businesses, and state and local governments to their pre-COVID-19 financial conditions. We are very fortunate to have Tom Crawford as our interim city administrator at this crucial time. Tom's been with the city for a long time. He helped our city balance our budget during the last recession, so he's well qualified to work with council to make the changes that will be necessary to meet our obligations. I've participated in several budgets as a member of the public. I've attended some meetings and made some phone calls and reviewed documents and given several speeches. I look forward to working with Tom to see what he thinks we need to do to try to balance things out. I will work to prioritize the budget so that we can continue to meet our basic needs to provide essential city and human services. And I think that's really important. We really have a lot of folks who are stressing right now, so we need to provide those human services with as little disruption as possible for our residents and employees, especially our frontline staff, because some of them are a little concerned that they might have pay or job cuts. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Briggs?
Yeah, in terms of addressing the budget shortfalls that we're going to have, it's going to be particularly challenging for the next couple of years. I know that when I thought about running for council, this was not something that I was anticipating working with. I knew that we had a structural budget deficit and that those were issues that we needed to address. But I also believe that we have a good recovery plan that's been put in place and recommended by our current interim city administrator, Mr. Crawford. But we're looking at budget shortfalls of $5 million by this fiscal year, $10 million this coming year. And I know the state's projecting further out than that and looking at even more significant continuing shortfalls the following year. And so in terms of how we actually address this, obviously there are projects that we're going to need to put on hold, and that's part of the recovery plan. There's going to be projects that we're going to need to not look at. We obviously need to make sure that we're protecting our city staff. And in the last recession, we cut a significant portion of our staff kind of in anticipation of that recession. And we don't really have that ability to do that in this go around without really hitting our city services pretty hard. So I'm interested to see how those discussions go with city staff. And I'm glad to see that there's leadership happening at the top level to make sure that that there are senior administrators that are looking at taking a pay cut first, and that's certainly something that I would consider making sure that I would do as a city council person as well. You know, as we look forward, a lot of what we're going to need to be able to do is be innovative with less, and be able to still excite staff that they're working for our community, still be focused on the future in terms of planning for our climate crisis, and working at the state level to work on some changes. So thanks.
And Dan?
I think we should be looking at the Ann Arbor Police Department. I think even in times that we're not in an economic downturn, we should be considering reallocating funds away from an armed police force towards programs and services that go towards meeting people's basic needs. At the same time, we should be giving the police fewer responsibilities. I don't think we need armed police officers doing everything we ask of them, including everything as far as enforcing the backyard chicken ordinance. We can cut the police department, and even if this was an economic downturn, we should be doing that. Another aspect of this that I think David touched on a little bit is that the biggest cost of running anything, I'd say, is labor. And we employ a lot of people directly as the city, and there's going to be a desire to cut the cost of labor by shedding some jobs, I think. And we should not be cutting the jobs of people living paycheck to paycheck, who are like the rank and file type of workers on the shop floor here working for the city. So we should not be doing that. We should be looking at cutting the cost of administration first, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Now on to question number 3, starting with Ms. Briggs. Most communities are becoming much more aware that racial bias is built into virtually every system in the United States. And while Ann Arbor takes pride in winning many Best City to Live in awards, it ranks poorly in income inequality and is identified as an economically segregated area. Please share examples of how City Council can identify and combat systemic racism in our community.
Yes, as you noted, racial bias and systemic racism are evident in all aspects of life, and you know, academically, we've seen the research on this in a lot of different areas, and we see it very clearly in our communities as well, in terms of housing policy, transportation policy, public safety policy. And so, you know, our emphasis recently, in the past few months, we have focused a lot on public safety. And I think that is obviously an area that we need to be focused on right now. I think it's a pretty exciting time actually for our nation, that that many communities across the country are taking a look at our public safety models. And Ann Arbor should definitely be at the forefront of this. We need to be making sure that we are first off, taking a look at our data and when it comes to policing. I've been looking around at some of the other models in terms of data in our country. And if you take a look at the city of Madison's police department and compare that to the city of Ann Arbor's police department, I think you'd be pretty shocked at how much or how little information Ann Arbor has and how much data is being provided in Madison. And this data is important because it's a first step in terms of really identifying what we're doing and what outcomes we're achieving and how we can correct those outcomes. So we can use that to really take a look at how we can improve our public safety model, how we're take a look at examining our community resources and reappropriating funds so that they get used more appropriately in the future to achieve more equitable outcomes. But again, policing is just one area of our institutional and systemic biases, and we really need to take a good look at other areas like housing and transportation.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. McNivich.
Like the question says, racism is baked into all aspects of our society. Locally, here we have a few institutions, namely the Ann Arbor Police Department, that we spend a quarter of our general budget on. The police have historically been a weapon to maintain social order, and the social order in this country historically from its inception has been white people own property, and police are there to protect private property generally. I know individual police probably have the idea that they're there to protect and serve, and I understand that people have roles that they choose in society, and they're doing the best that they can as individuals. That's fine. I'm talking about the institution of police, and that's something we as a community locally have a lot of control over. And I think that the public should exert that control in its the collective bargaining process with the police department. I think we should take the union to task and make sure that things like our Independent Police Oversight Commission has some, power. Right now, we've had this process over the past few years of trying to exact some kind of civilian oversight over our police department. It's really been ineffective, I'd say, and we should be going further than that. Not only should our Independent Police Oversight Commission have the ability to independently review instances of use of force of the police department, but like I said earlier, we should be giving the police less to do and giving more of what we currently send to the police department elsewhere in the budget.
I absolutely agree that local government has a role in advancing racial justice. I attended the June 16th Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting. Many folks were calling for a radical shift to how we police our community. Some were calling for transitioning to a more effective community policing model, while others were calling for more drastic cuts to our police department. The city's reopened contract negotiations with the police union, so we'll see what comes from that process. Hopefully, we'll get a more just organization, and I support those efforts. A lot of residents would like to add more investigative authority to our Independent Police Oversight Commission. This could be done by providing several things which they themselves have requested over the years, including providing access to the LEAN network, subpoena power for records and documents, and adequate funding to conduct the investigations that they feel are needed. The city recently passed a resolution pursuing greater LEAN access, which will require changes at the state level, and hopefully we can do more in these other areas as well. Racial justice also includes working to resolve social justice issues. There are quite a few Ann Arbor residents from historically disadvantaged communities who've done well, so they will require economic assistance from our government to continue living in this rapidly changing city. But there are other long-standing members of this community who haven't been as prosperous, and our city needs to make sure that we create a healthy, supportive environment for them and their children. I'll work with Jennifer Hall at the Ann Arbor Housing Commission and other community stakeholders to provide an adequate supply of housing that's affordable to our low-income and lower middle-income residents. We can't continue to only build housing for wealthy. Our economy and our residents are suffering and will continue to suffer until our city corrects this. Well, I will work to advance racial justice and social justice issues. I won't attempt to cure one injustice by creating another. We're facing a lot of challenges, and we need to find ways to work together to reach solutions that will maintain a high quality of life for all of our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Now on to question number 4, starting with Mr. McNivich. Now that the City Council unanimously adopted A20, the carbon neutrality by 2030 agenda, what are the most important next steps that the City Council should take to implement this plan?
I think there's a couple answers here. One of the most important steps is funding it. There's a lot of, like I've said earlier, we do a pretty good job of identifying issues that we need to work on as a community. But when it comes to taking steps to address those issues, we don't necessarily do that at what I would consider the necessary scale. And to address issues at the necessary scale, you got to put your money where your mouth is. Budgets are moral documents and all of those cliches. So yeah, we have to, if we want to do things, we have to put up some money to accomplish it. One of the things that I'd like to see be done is addressing the question of community choice aggregation, whether or not that's the right way to address the amount of carbon emissions that are baked into our electricity that we use. Electricity accounts for the majority of carbon emissions here, and DTE's energy is super dirty. And I don't think any investor-owned utility any other investor-owned utility that we might purchase energy through is gonna share the values that we share and share our commitment to carbon neutrality. So they're not gonna move fast enough to renewables, and we should be doing that on our own, which is why I'm pretty adamant that we should be exploring a locally controlled energy utility and take control of our own clean energy future so that we can rapidly transition to renewable energy and not have to depend on somebody like DTE. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNivich. And now Mr. Silkworth.
Well, I support local efforts to reduce carbon emissions and combat climate change in our community. I support the current A20 plan goals. I believe that the current plan is an aspirational document. I think that this plan provides a framework that can be used to move us toward our carbon neutrality goals if we can get buy-in from key stakeholders and outside funding to help enact it. I've heard a number of residents and even some stakeholders raise very specific concerns about this plan, which makes many believe that we may encounter a number of roadblocks along our journey towards carbon neutrality. Our city, several key stakeholders like the AETA and other local partners like the University of Michigan will experience budget shortfalls both this year and next, and due to the financial crisis created by COVID-19, and our state budget will have significant shortfalls as well. So I don't see us getting a lot of funding for those kinds of things there, but perhaps we should advocate for a stimulus package that would help include funding to assist us in transitioning to a more carbon-free community. There may also be a lack of buy-in from key stakeholders and a continuation of state and federal legislative barriers, which would imperil the current plan. A representative from DTE expressed concerns about certain aspects of the plan, and laws will need to be changed at the state and federal levels to accomplish our stated goals. So given the current composition of government, this is very unlikely, but we should certainly explore our options. We should explore opportunities to try to obtain policy changes that are acceptable to all stakeholders and funding from the federal government or others to support these efforts. I'm willing to explore these and other options, and we'll need to revisit the plan and amend it as needed to account for our ongoing developments. We must also support policies that will prepare our buildings and infrastructure for what may occur in case the world fails to meet its carbon reduction goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Briggs?
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of what's the most important aspects of implementing, starting out to implement the A20 plan, the first thing is that we really need to recognize that we are planning for a crisis. It doesn't feel like it right now, but and it's really challenging to behave that way when we're struggling with a current crisis. But as Dan mentioned, we're going to need to make sure that we're allocating funds appropriately to this. And obviously that's going to be particularly challenging this next couple of years to allocate more funding towards implementation of these goals. And so to be able to move forward with the aspects of this plan, we're going to need to do a few things. We're going to, need to really seriously evaluate all aspects of how we prioritize capital improvements projects, making sure that sustainability and planning for climate change is a key component that is ranking and prioritizing those projects higher on the list. We need to be making sure that we are making use of this time that we have right now to really work with the state legislature to get the changes we need there so that we can show leadership across the state and advance not only work in our own area, but for communities across the state. We need to be doing the planning work so that hopefully when we see administrative change in November, and there may be some more federal grants available, that we're well positioned to make use of them. But we also need to be building knowledge about the plan and not fear mongering, which is what I've been hearing a lot of recently. The reality is that if we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, it's going to require us to change what we've done. We can't do things the same way that we've done them in the past and reach different outcomes. Of course, we're going to need to use our land differently, and we shouldn't be scaring the public about that. So thanks.
Okay, you hear me all right? I apologize for that. It was my fault. On this next question, we're starting with Mr. Silkworth. In canvassing your constituents, what seems to be their most concern? Their most important concern?
Well, that's a different year, you know. That's a great question because it's a very different year. I think a lot of people are very concerned with the effects that are going to happen to our local economy based on the budget challenges by COVID-19. I mean, the university is laying off hundreds of nurses and other employees. You know, are we going to reopen in the fall for students? Are restaurants going to be reopened safely? You know, there are so many important things that people are really, really concerned about, and we face so many budget challenges. Like, you know, there were $5 million shortfall this year by June 30th. And then next year, it's supposed to be another 10 million. So how are we going to effectively provide just even the basic services or maintain, you know, the kinds of programs that we've come to enjoy here? So yeah, I think that there are a lot of really important things. I think the economy is huge. I think that, you know, trying to get over COVID-19, trying to get the university and our businesses back up and running. I mean, it's really heartbreaking. So for a lot of residents because of all the things that have happened to us. So hopefully those are the things I think that people are most concerned about. Thank you.
Ms. Briggs, please.
Yeah. So I just started knocking doors about a week and a half ago or so, which I can understand why it would be a lovely thing to do, start being able to do in April. Obviously that wasn't possible this year, and I've been keeping a good distance back, but it's been remarkable actually. As I've started knocking doors, there's one thing that I hear consistently from everyone, and that is concern around community affordability. I think that was a concern prior to the coronavirus, and it continues to be a top priority because people really, that I've been speaking to, really aren't putting it in the framework of coping with the coronavirus yet, though some certainly must be dealing with that as well. And you know, the reality is that to deal with our community affordability, we've been struggling with this. We've been struggling with why our community is getting less affordable and how we're going to what we're going to do about it. And it seems to be land use seems to be the one issue that is dividing our community the most. And some folks seem to be wanting to sort of fan the flames of that. But I think what we really need to do is try to get to where there is common agreement, which is a real desire to fix this problem. And, you know, in terms of how I would address it, we know that the demand for housing in Ann Arbor is driving up costs. And we can either make our community a less attractive place to live, or we can add to our housing supply and figure out how to do that sensitively and manage that growth effectively. So that's going to have us looking at growth all across our community to try to
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Briggs. Mr. McNevich.
I think there's a difference here between the concerns of the individual and the concerns of the community. And what I think a lot of voters do, and what we should be doing as aspiring elected officials too, and once we're on council, the same, is identifying that self-interest, the material interest of the people who want to make sure that there's a future for them and their family, specifically in Ann Arbor. The people worried about what changes to zoning ordinances and loosening restrictions on that, what that could mean for their neighborhood. And also balancing that with the collective values, the collective needs of the community. So I think that's where a lot of people are in terms of issues. I don't think, you know, when people are talking to somebody running for city council, they're going to talk about the issues nebulously maybe, and maybe you get into their own personal story. But what people are concerned about and what drives their actions, I'd say, is that self-interest. Can I secure a future for myself and my family, specifically us? And yes, secondary, although we are all good liberals here in Ann Arbor, and want what's best for our neighbors, you know, people want to take care of their own first, and that's a real thing, and we should identify that and bake that into a lot of baking our decisions as public officials. Thanks.
Thank you. Now on to the last question. We'll start with Ms. Briggs. The Greenbelt millage designates 1/3 of the proceeds for the acquisition of parkland within the city limits. Due to the lack of recent parkland acquisition within the city limits, this portion of the fund has accumulated a $6 to $7 million balance. Our city has 163 parks spanning 2,100 acres. Should this fund balance be used to acquire additional parkland while there is still land available, or does Ann Arbor already have enough parks? Ms. Briggs.
Interesting question. Yeah, in terms of how we should use that surplus, you know, I've certainly heard from a number of residents that they feel like we have a lot of parkland within the city, and they're increasingly concerned about our ability to maintain it and make sure that we're using that parkland as well as we can. But this Greenbelt millage is really essential for making sure that we continue to preserve land around our community, as we've been talking about in terms of land use and growth. There are immense pressures on our region for housing, and we want to make sure that we preserve this space outside of Ann Arbor, that we make sure that we continue to have agricultural land that continues to be used as agricultural land, that we continue to have green space outside of the city, and that's something that is a real priority for our community. I think a really wise choice that we as a community made a number of years ago, and something that we need to continue to prioritize. But what that means is that we in turn need to manage our land pretty effectively within our community and grow responsibly within our community as well. So that means we've made the choice to grow more densely in our urban core. We need to think about growing along our transit corridors and adding housing there. And we need to think about really sensitively adding growth into our neighborhoods, whether that's accessory dwelling units or having the community conversation about where additional housing and additional growth in neighborhoods is possible.
Thank you, Ms. Briggs. Mr. McNivich. Mr. McNivich?
Sorry, I had a technical difficulty there for a second. Yeah, I think this question might be coming up because there was something floated in the last couple months by a sitting city council member, and I'm unsure of the feasibility of it. And it was the idea of repurposing the Greenbelt millage for affordable housing. And, you know, given the circumstances and the goal of the Greenbelt to, you know, deter growth and sprawl outside of the city and hopefully funnel it into the city. And given, you know, the current dynamic here on council that growth within the city, you know, isn't necessarily happening the way you would expect it given the Greenbelt. I think if there is a way to use those funds to spur dense development, the kind we can see through the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, the type we're talking about in terms of repurposing these surface level parking lots the city owns and getting local funds in order to, you know, leverage federal dollars to build the type of affordable housing that we've all been talking about as a community for a while. That's something that I think if somebody is proposing that sort of thing, that we should be coming to the table and talking that out. And I think there's an opportunity there to secure a constant stream of revenue for affordable housing that we haven't seen, and that you know, that we haven't seen with, you know, recent city council and the recent city budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Greenbelt millage, it does have $6 or $7 million of surplus to be used, or for the funds intended to be used within the city. And I do believe that it was spelled out that they should very definitely be used that way. I'm not sure that that we should repurpose that because you know, while we are adding density through massing of buildings in various portions of our town, I believe that it's very important to have green spaces interwoven throughout our community, because as more and more private property owners contemplate selling their property to developers for redevelopment, we're gonna harm the natural systems that we all enjoy. You know, when I walk through the neighborhood, I depend on all of my neighbors having nice yards with great trees and wonderful plantings. And I also enjoy when the city has the opportunity to buy a small parcel and to make that forever green, because, you know, the birds and all of the animals that live in this city that we all love and enjoy. And you know, I live in an apartment community, okay? I see goldfinches and cardinals and robins and all kinds of wonderful birds just all the time. And, you know, they would be, we're putting them in jeopardy by cutting down more and more trees and by losing green spaces. So I think we need to preserve that money and use that within the city and find other areas to address our affordability problems. You know, there are plenty of spaces that still remain available for redevelopment or development that we can use to address our other concerns without, you know, tapping into those funds. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for our 90-second closing statement from each of you. We'll begin with Ms. Briggs.
Great. Well, thank you so much again to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, and for all of you who watched at home to become a more informed voter. It should be pretty clear by now that we all care deeply about Ann Arbor, but the question, we have tough times ahead, and the question isn't, do we care about Ann Arbor, but do we have the skills and the experience and the knowledge to help lead us through these difficult times? And when we're faced with difficult decisions, which the next council most certainly will be, what will we prioritize? Are we going to close our doors and allow our community to become even more expensive? Or are we going to invest in our future and build a community that can be resilient in the face of climate crisis? I hope that you'll go to my website, ericafor2.com, and learn more about my background and priorities. If you have any questions, I have daily virtual coffee hours, and my phone number's on the website, so I certainly welcome questions. I also hope you'll click on the updates button, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I have one that I send out before every city council meeting, so you can learn more about how I think about issues and also important issues that are coming up on the council agenda. And if I'm elected, I'll turn that into a regular constituent newsletter as well. You'll also find a list of supporters. I've received organizational endorsements from the AFL-CIO, Local 499, Ann Arbor Board of Realtors. I've also earned the support of a number of former and elected officials because they've seen me hard at work. And while we haven't always agreed on everything, they know that I'll work hard for our community if I'm elected. So I would be honored to have your vote on August 4th. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. McNevich.
Thanks to the League of Women Voters for putting this on. Like I said, I'm running for city council because we do a decent job of identifying issues that we need to work on in this community: housing, police, carbon neutrality, but we haven't really taken the steps to address those issues at the scale necessary. Specifically, I think there's one major reason why we can't really take off on any of these issues, and I think that's the factionalization that happens in our local politics. It pretty much derives from a disagreement in the approach and the analysis of how density is going to affect our ability to address the affordable housing issue and climate too, and the sort of inability of city council to make up ground on any of the issues that we're talking about here kind of stems from when individual actors in these factions take up positions based on what the other faction's saying and they're not really proposing things, they're mostly just saying no. Thank you. My name's Dan McNevich.
Thank you. Mr. Silkworth.
I'd like to thank the League for hosting this event, and Erica and Dan for participating in it, and the viewers for taking time to watch it. This election will determine how our city moves forward on a wide range of local issues, including whether or not the city will be allowed to weaken traditional protections for single-family neighborhoods. I oppose those efforts. Will we be able to maintain affordability of our current housing, effectively meet our affordable housing needs, continue efforts to maintain historic preservation and protection of our natural features? How will we implement A20 to achieve local carbon reductions, address local or social justice, police reforms, independent police oversight? Today, in the midst of so many crises, we're presented with a series of challenges, and to address these, we must listen carefully to community concerns and work collaboratively with key stakeholders and seek long-term solutions. I'll be an independent voice and a problem solver, not aligned with any local faction or slate. I'll listen to all good ideas, no matter where they originate. I'll collaborate with all community leaders and council members who advance solutions that will be in your best interests. Together with you, I'm ready to take on these challenges as your 5th Ward Council member. To learn more, visit votedavidsilkworth.org. Remember, vote David Silkworth in the August 4th Democratic primary, because together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for participating in this valuable session. I will now turn this over to Sally for a closing statement.
Thank you again for being with us tonight, and thanks to all of the folks who contributed questions for our forum. All our candidate forums will be available for streaming on your computer or smartphone. You can go to our website, lwvannarbor.org, and look for the link for the programs. They will also be available, can be viewed on CTN. For additional nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org. This is the League's voter resource guide covering local, state, and federal candidates and current proposals that will appear on your individual ballot. You just go to the website and put in your address, and all of that information will be available to you. Also remember that now everybody can do absentee ballot. So there's no reason not to vote this year. You can do it ahead of time, and you can register and vote right up through the day of the election. So just remember, no matter how you do it, make sure you vote in the August 4th primary election. Thank you.
Thank you.